Welcome to the Best Hopes podcast. My name, as always, is Adam Perler.
And I'm Cecil Walker.
And today we're going to go back to an episode that we did in season 1 and kind of nuance some things a bit. Today we're going to talk about the episode that was originally episode 5, which was an episode on dependence. Cecil, I got some really important questions for you.
That means they're hard questions.
So I'm going to go back and I'm going to read a little bit about what we said in that episode, and then hopefully we can pull it apart a bit. So one of the things that we said is that dependence, I'll start here. It says, this time we're going to talk about having hope as something we can depend on. And we said that that what that means is that we can put our trust in something that's steady, a force out there, something that's holding stable, that we can consistently rely on. It's not something that's moving. It's not something that's arbitrary. It's not something that's vague. It's really something that we can put our trust in. Looking back, that is a giant statement. Something steady, something unmoving, something real, something not arbitrary, inconsistent. So my first question, don't think you're going to get off easily.
I think one is good.
My first question is, how do we know what that thing out there is that is steady, consistent, unmoving? How do we know, how do we evaluate this thing out there is worth putting my trust in? How do we know that?
Well,
good luck.
I have no way of giving an actual scientific, across the board answer to this. But my first impression for that is those attributes speak to the value of the thing that we're putting that dependence on, that we're putting that trust in. And I don't think that what the thing is needs to necessarily be, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. At least I wouldn't frame it that way. There's a right or wrong answer in what you put your trust in. But I do think it has to meet the level of value that starts to give you these things that we're attributing it to, that starts to give you this ability to trust it and depend on it, and it can make a difference in your life and encourage you and all those other things that we say. And I think because of that, then it has to be steady enough. I value this and I can come back to it and it's still there. It has to be consistent enough, and all these other words that we threw out apparently in the first season, because I think if it is something really important like love or your religious faith or some dedication to whatever principles that you have, or dedication to being a certain type of a person, whatever the thing is, if it's important enough, I think it has that consistency and flexibility and unconditionality to it. And so, yeah, that's my half answer to your your very big question, or at least that's the first thing that comes to mind, I guess.
I really like that answer. It does make me think of another question, another few questions actually. So the first question I have is, are you equating that consistent thing out there that we're putting trust in? Are you equating that to things like values, love, faith? I guess, is that the equation?
I think the image I was conjuring is that it is something valuable, and those are just the things that immediately came to mind. But it doesn't necessarily have to be what we quintessentially think of as values. I mean, someone could, I don't know, when we're framing it as dependence, that makes me think of you're depending on something that you can keep drawing on. And so that feels less like the other kinds of things we hope for that we talked about on like ambition or something, less like an ambition for an accomplishment of a success or something, and more like a well of a thing that you draw on. That's just what it kind of leans my mind into. But I don't think it necessarily has to be a value. I wouldn't say it's always that or only that.
One of the things that I do like about the way that you're describing it, and it alters a bit the way that I was thinking about it, is a lot of those things like love, faith, those kinds of things, are things within me. Mm-hmm. So in some sense, what you've done is you said, like, you can depend on yourself. And I think what that requires a bit is real honesty with yourself. Like, what kind of person am I? Mm-hmm. What do I value? What kinds of characteristics do I have that I can come back to and say, in some sense, I'm this kind of person. Because I'm this kind of person, that means I have to engage in this situation in this way. Mm-hmm. So it's almost a framework that, like you keep saying, like I can come back to and say, who am I? Mm-hmm. And then I can draw on that to help me navigate through difficult things, which is interesting because, and maybe you can help me walk through the nuance of this, the way that I was thinking about it originally was something external to myself. I think an easy comparison, you used faith as an example. So if I have faith, something external to me would be like God or a supreme being or something. And I put faith in that. In my lexicon, he is unchanging. He is consistent. I can depend on the same kind of interactions over and over and over. So it's something outside of me. But you could put that idea in lots of other realms. I think that's one of the things that makes society hopefully consistent, right? When I send my kids to school, they can put their dependence, their trust in, I'm going to see the same teachers every day. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go to the same classes in the same order every day. I can trust, I can depend on the consistency of this system, of this organization. Mm-hmm. When the system starts to fail, my faith, my hope in being able to achieve what I want to achieve, it wavers a bit because the system is now undependable. Mm-hmm. And so I started thinking about it more as like I depend on external things, and I can put my dependence, my hope in those things because they're consistent. How does that like interact with or jive with this like more internal concept that you were talking about?
I think it's really interesting, that mirroring of, what's internal versus what's external. It doesn't feel like it clashes with what I was picturing too. I think maybe where the things are housed or where the dependence is being placed is maybe different, but it still seems to be, it's a valuable thing that you find yourself going back to, relying on, or depending on, and that requires a consistency in that thing. It feels like they still can be grouped together, whether it's inside of myself or it's these real tangible structures outside of myself, or being, beyond me, or whatever it is that I'm putting this external dependence on. Yeah, I could see all of those things as being objects of dependence, if that's how we want to kind of describe it. And while you were talking and describing those things, it also showed me, or I could see how a lack of a dependence or breaking of that consistency could then start to crumble a bit of the hope, or all the things that, we're talking about on this podcast, all the ways that you benefit from being able to engage with that in a maybe a depending kind of a way. And I didn't mean to think about this, but it did make me think about this. As you know, I was in a car accident recently, And I've never been in a car accident like that before. I think one time I've been like a fender bender or something. But before this, I would have thought nothing of driving. And in a way, I wouldn't have described it this way, but in this context now and after having a pretty bad car accident, in a way, it's almost like I was depending on everyone to do what they're supposed to do as you're driving. I'll be in control of my car and follow the rules and do what I need to do to keep me and the people around me safe. And I'm depending on everyone else to be following those same rules too. Obviously, we know, especially in Atlanta, that not everyone is following those rules 100% of the time or to the T. But there's a general consensus of I have to kind of trust in other people are going to do what they're supposed to do as I'm supposed to do what I'm supposed to do. I mean, it's kind of like I remember one time I argued with it was a very small and dumb argument. But like when you come with my brother about like when you come to a 4-way stop or something like that, what's supposed to happen? And I said, well, everyone's supposed to follow the rules of who has the right of way, who's supposed to go first, who's supposed to turn, who's supposed to do the different things like that. And I remember we were driving together, which is what sparked this conversation, is someone else was trying to get me to go before them, even though it was their right away. I don't remember the situation of the traffic or whatever. But for some reason, all I remember is they were supposed to go, but they were trying to get me to go. And I said, well, I basically was like, that's problematic. That's, as maybe generous as that might seem, that's not exactly what I would ideally prefer. And he was like, no, just take it. They're being nice. They're just creating this opportunity for you. You should just take it and enjoy it. And I was like, but there's a system of expectation here. Everyone's depending on everyone following like what's supposed to happen. And that's what makes traffic work optimally. And if someone, even in a kind way, is trying to say, let's break that system temporarily or whatever, then they're now breaking the expectation and all of the consistency that is required for us to all depend on this. And I would say the same on a bigger scale. When you get into an accident, obviously somebody broke something about the expectations of how people are supposed to behave in this system of traffic and driving. And so all that to say is, with losing that consistency in such a major way, I now can see myself in traffic wondering, well, is that person going to follow the things that they're supposed to do? This car is changing lanes really quickly and moving really fast. How do I know they might not, make a similar mistake of defying the expectations, breaking that dependence that we all kind of are trusting in being on the roads together? And it feels like it calls that into question in a way where if that was unquestioned, you could then see how you can kind of benefit from the confidence and the ease and the whatever else comes from, oh, I can depend on this. I can always come back to this is how things are going to be.
What's really interesting about that is when we put it back into the concept of hope, right? If hope is underlining all of this, you're getting in the car, hoping to arrive somewhere, hoping to arrive safely, expecting, depending on the system was going to work. And I think you're making me think about something that when our hope isn't firm, when it's shaky, when there's trepidation, when the opposite of hope, like that fear or the concern or the worry comes, I stop behaving with certainty. And I've also been in a car accident before, not like yours.
I don't want to win that contest.
We are glad that you are still here with us. But I remember after, like, uncertainty, like there would be like this continual questioning of, are they going to do what they're supposed to do? And looking over my shoulder, checking like 2, 3, 4 times. And it was the opposite of hope. It was like doubt and confusion and questioning and anxiety and worry and all of those things impacting my decisiveness. And I think as I listen to you, one of the outcomes of hope is that when I hope and I put my dependence on something, I can act with surety. I can act with decisiveness. I can act with certainty. And that then impacts, it kind of has this ripple effect of confidence goes up, satisfaction goes up, happiness goes up. And so I think when we're able to depend on our hope, on this thing that's out there, on the system that's working, or on our own capability, our own capacity, whether it's internal, external, there are so many positive benefits of like certainty, decisiveness, like clarity, all of the confidence, all of these things that I don't know if I had like directly linked to the presence of hope. And I think sometimes it's the lack of that hope, the lack of dependence, that then all these, like, I'll put in air quotes, like symptoms, like all of a sudden bubble up. And then if we pay too much attention to the symptoms, if we pay too much attention to the worry or the confusion or the lack of clarity, it just becomes this like downward spiral of like hope goes down. And so I hadn't really, until this discussion, really like honed in on the importance of the immovability, of the certainty, of the like that thing that's there that I put my hope in, put my dependence on, the not moving, the working the way it's supposed to work is a really important component that I'm not sure I had ever like honed in on. That's a critical component of hope.
I think you're totally right. And that does show us that it shows us hope operating in places we might not have normally have described it before, or maybe even noticed it before, because when it's operating optimally without doubt or uncertainty or something threatening its consistency, things work the way that they should, or at least that's how we would describe it. This is the way it should be. Driving should be this simple thing. You get in the car and you go to where you're supposed to go.
Accident free.
Exactly. And so when it operates in that way, the need for hope and the benefit of hope becomes invisible almost, because it's like it's going the way it's supposed to go. This machine you built is operating in the way that it was intended to operate, and so now it's like that you don't have to hope for it to operate that way, or the hope you do have for it to operate that way suddenly becomes kind of a bit concealed. It's kind of locked into place in that, well, it just works. It just goes that way, and I don't have to question it. And so I get all the benefits of it working out that way. I get the benefits of that hope for that without ever having to call into question any of those things or experience the inconsistency of it. But I think you're right that the loss of that, or a threat of loss of that, then kind of shows you, oh, when things wobble, here's what I start to lose. Here's what's getting kind of sacrificed in the place of that loss of hope. But I think that just goes to show how powerful this hope thing is that we're talking about, that it's apparently like the glue. It's like this concealer in between everything that we do and everything that we expect to happen and the ways that we move through our lives. And when we find ourselves in a really tough position where we're maybe struggling with hope, that's when it starts to feel like some things are missing, or I'm not totally sure of how to navigate, how to go through, or at least the experience of navigating something starts to feel a little bit harder. Kind of like when we first learned to drive, probably was a bit more uncertainty back then. We're still hoping for the certain kind of outcomes we're hoping, but there still was less assurance, I guess, in what's going to happen and how it's going to happen and how I behave. And so just like you were describing, we find ourselves kind of second guessing a bit, kind of thinking about, well, what if this and what if that? And how do I know it's going to go this way? I think that's before the hope gets kind of solidified into I don't have to question this kind of a form of hope, I think.
This is a weird question, but so should I don't know what word to use except for hope. Should the hope be that it becomes transparent and visible? Should
That's a good question.
is that the expectation of, I hope so much that it just becomes like the water that I swim in?
Mm-hmm. In a lot of instances, I feel like I could say yes to that. I'm quickly trying to search for, is there an example where I wouldn't say yes to that? I want to give a vague yes.
I don't exactly know what a vague yes is.
I guess what preceded that question was, if it works out well and consistently enough, then the hope does become invisible. That means it's working, and things are then working as they should. And I think that's what we want. If I think of the driving example, you first start out, your first several months, maybe, I guess different people are different, right? Different kinds of careful. Some people maybe just in their first couple of drives are only a little bit nervous about it.
Some should be more nervous than they are.
I definitely agree. But either way, at the beginning, you're kind of nervous and maybe questioning things and uncertain about how it goes. And you're maybe a bit shaky, maybe literally shaky in driving. And you kind of do want to get to a point where I don't have to constantly think about, what are my hands supposed to do? What's the very tiny details of what I'm supposed to do in all these little moments to make sure that nothing goes wrong? And then the sense of nerves and discomfort that comes up when, there's a car that's passing by me, or I have to make a left turn here, or you kind of do want to get to that point of not having to second guess and overthink and feel uncomfortable about all of those things. You want to be able to just drive to your destination and all of it feel fine. And so I think if that's demonstrative of, any predicament that we can find ourselves in, then that's my vague yes. Is I think, I do want it to feel secure enough that I don't even have to face the uncertainty or the difficulty that comes with not being so sure about it, not kind of like feeling like I can depend on or have this sense of hope and trust in how things are going to go. Because I think in a way, that's where a lot of the trouble that people come to us in therapy kind of comes from, obviously in lots of different other scenarios, but doubt and uncertainty and inconsistency and all the words you can kind of apply to that or group with that. That I think is what fuels the stuff that we see in therapy: anxiety and attachment issues and family conflict and depression, all these kinds of things. That this is such an oversimplification, but I do think there's links between that stuff. And so I think that if it worked out the way that it's supposed to work out, like we're saying, with these other examples, there would be less anxiety. There would be less, you wouldn't need to stop and think about, how should I approach this family member? If things were just kind of operating the way that you had set out to hope that they would operate, and it went off without that threat of things being inconsistent or not working out. You wouldn't have to think about, how should I approach this thing that causes me anxiety, my job, or this scary situation or something like that. So yeah, I never really thought about, that question before, is if the hope is that it becomes invisible, but it seems like that's a good outcome, maybe the best outcome of the situation is it's so not a problem that you don't even have to think about it being a problem.
I think what's fascinating about that answer is that you actually kind of brought us back to where we began, of I can trust myself. If we put it back in the context of driving, like I practice enough, I'm used to lots of different scenarios. I just get comfortable with the way that a car works and functions. And over time, my confidence in myself, my trust in myself, my dependence in myself increases. And so when I have that increased dependence on my capability, things have to be less consciously in my awareness. And that frees me up then to just flow with the system. And I would say what's fascinating about that is that when I become really dependent on myself, on my abilities, my capabilities, I would say that's actually when we become a really proficient, if we keep going with the car example, a proficient driver. one of the things that I read an article about when people are learning the difference between beginning drivers and proficient drivers. And one of the things that beginning drivers do is that they like keep their eyes straight forward. They're looking at the road. They're looking at what's coming. They're taking things like one step at a time. Whereas proficient drivers, kind of their eyes are constantly scanning. They're taking in things from the right. They're taking things in from the left. There's this like constant movement where you're taking in a whole bunch of stimulus. And just the thought of like constantly moving eyes seems counterintuitive. It seems like if you want to drive straight, you need to look straight. It seems like if you want to avoid things in the road, you need to be looking at the road. But the reality is when my comprehension increases, when it expands, when I take in what's on the periphery, I'm actually more aware of contexts that could influence the road, even if they're not currently on the road. I'm going to pay attention to little kids that are playing, or a ball that's rolling into a street, or the car door that might open from a car that's parked on the side of the street. So things that aren't relevant to how does the car work, what color are the lights, I now am paying attention to what's out there that then I can anticipate. And I think that what you're describing is like as my internal dependence confidence increases, it allows me then to take in even more of the external. It makes me more proficient. It increases my awareness. And I think I'm going to wrap in something that we haven't really talked about. But I think this like external bigger awareness, when we take it out of the context of the car, I think that's actually also where gratitude becomes a really important component. I think that hope and dependence on myself and dependence on these external things that are unmovable, I think that can get us so far. But I think when we understand, when we comprehend more than just like our little path there, we start to take into consideration, oh, there are other things that are helping me along the way. There are people that are here in present. I can depend on other relationships. I don't have to get to my ultimate destination on my own. I'm aware of things that are impacting me positively, pushing me along toward my end goal. I think that along with all those other internal things that we talked about, like confidence increasing and hope increasing and expectation increasing and confidence increasing and all those things, I think one of the things that also naturally increases is this sense of gratitude of I'm grateful that the system is working the way that it's supposed to be working. I'm grateful that I have these people in my life that are kind of buffering and helping me out, supporting me when I need to. I'm grateful that my confidence, my ability is slowly increasing. So I think, yes, it does become invisible, but I also think that we can stop and we can analyze and say, where's the growth been? Where have I been more dependent on myself, more dependent on this external thing? What has helped to like keep the system going? And so I think it can absolutely become invisible. But I also think when it works really well, we can analyze, we can stop and we can say, how is this working so well? And I think that brings a sense of gratitude.
Yeah, all of that you were describing made me think, because I think sometimes we have such, we being like, people in general, have such a bias for the negative, I think. It feels like it's safer to be on the lookout for the negative to all these different things. And I think that kind of sows the lack of trust, the antithesis to a lot of what we're talking about. We can have doubt in ourselves because we just want to be sure. I don't want to be overly confident or over assume these things about myself or get myself in a position where I can't really hold up or deliver, where I look like a fool or whatever. We can have doubt in the world. The world is a bad place and bad people are going to do bad things. Horrible, random bad things are going to happen. Natural disaster, just bad luck, whatever. In any of these areas that we're talking about hope and talking about how we can kind of hope that things will work out the way that they should work out, I feel like there naturally can be a tendency to lose some of that, or it feels like there's a way to go about that where you find yourself distrusting things in yourself, in the world, in if we're looking at it from a religious angle too, like in a higher power, if you are doubting your faith or feeling like you're being persecuted by some greater power, or even persecuted by the systems, government, political, whatever systems that you find yourself under the influence of, maybe doubting the people around you too. But there's this flip side to all of those negative things. And what made me think about that is when you were talking about gratitude, because I think if we seem to keep riding on this driving analogy, which isn't the first time we've talked about driving extensively. I could easily live my whole life, accident or not, with anxiety about driving, anxiety about other drivers, anxiety about my own driving, my lack of sense of control in the situation of what could happen. Road could have bad conditions. Another person could ignore a stoplight. Like I could doubt myself. Will I be able to handle if something happens, and do I know how to react well enough, and can I drive well enough to deal with that? There's all these places and all this room for that doubt and lack of dependence and sense of trust in things. But when you said, there's a lot outside of our control that we can be grateful for too, it kind of shows that there's choice in all of these areas, whether it's within ourselves or it's external or it's with other people or, wherever you want to put the focus. I think there's still choice in which way we go, because I could cynically say, driving's bad and driving's dangerous because you never know what other people are going to do. And in a way that kind of feels accurate. But I could also say, I feel grateful for how these things kind of intuitively work themselves out. How people, have a tendency for trying to secure safety and make sure that things that go well. How people... I guess even thinking of my accident, yes, there was someone who maybe didn't follow all the expectations of how things would go, and he ended up rear-ending me. But also there was a woman whose name I still don't know, and I don't know who this person was, who helped me as soon as I got out of the car. She tried to help me open the door of my car. She tried to help me call you in that moment. She helped me with my injury. And that was outside of my control. I did nothing to earn that woman's help. I had no clue who she was. And so I think in the middle of that moment, I'm in the intersection between the world is a bad place and look at what this person negligently did, and the world must kind of be a good place because look at what this random stranger who had nothing to do with this incident did. And so I think that kind of demonstrates what was elicited when you were describing that sense of gratitude is this kind of sense of, well, I can choose which side I want to go to. I can choose to have dependence and trust in things, or I can choose to say it's not worth it, or I have this expectation of bad things. And I think that's going to paint really the picture of the world you're living in, no matter what, or at least how you experience it. And I guess that's kind of at the backbone of this whole podcast is, how can we try to make the choice that gives us, better outcomes, that gives us more of a beneficial experience of ourselves and of the people around us and of what it takes to get to where we're trying to go. Yeah. I really appreciate and value that component of choice. And I think hope often is a choice. Mm-hmm. I could choose to be hopeful, or I could choose to be hopeless. I could choose to focus on things that will increase hope, or I could choose to focus on reasons not to be hopeful. I think this idea of dependence really highlights the essence of choice of I can choose to hope that I am capable, that I have the capacity to do what I need to do. I can hope on external things, that the systems will work, that the entities will, cooperate with what's good for me, or I could choose not to. And so I think I really appreciate that, the added insert of choice in the process. Anything else that we need to make sure to get to on this component? That was more than I thought we'd get to with that initial question. I didn't know where we were going.
I think that's often the case for us. All right. Well, hopefully that conversation was thought-provoking. I know it was for me. I think I'm thinking about hope, and we've done a season and a half, and I think I'm thinking in hope in a different way than I have before. So if you know of somebody who could benefit from this consideration of dependence and hope, please feel free to share with them. And in the meantime, feel free to make hopeful choices.